Dread Cold, the latest charity anthology from Fantastic Books Publishing. Here comes the fear. Inspired by a lonely vista, white snow, a still blue lake, a castle on a hill, these authors weave their magic. Is it an ancient castle or a modern hotel? Is the horror dressed in darkness waiting in the dungeons, or dressed as an innocent by the side of the lake? The stories play out across the seasons, across the ages, across the stars. Includes competition winner The Loop by novelist Mark Henderson, and an invited contribution from guest editor, award-winning horror author Matt Adcock. The book will donate to the charities Anti-Slavery International and Embrace the Middle East.
If you're into science fiction and particularly horror, you'll know the author Matt Adcock. His debut novel, Complete Darkness, came out as one of Den of Geek's top 10 books of the year. And he sat there alongside works by Philip Pullman and Margaret Atwood. He also got several other Book of the Week accolades. Here's what he has to say about the horror collection Dread Cold. Here comes the fear. The stories you're about to experience are without doubt some of the most harrowing, nasty and dread-inducing that I've ever had the pleasure to read. There are differing takes on hell, suffering and trauma, all linked by a chilly place, a location that bears witness to some truly unspeakable yet equally delicious horrors. What is it about us humans? We're the only species that have been shown to purposefully scare ourselves. Animals feel fear. It can damage them more than physical pain. Emotional distress can leave them so broken they can't function. But studies have concluded we are born with only two innate fears, fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. It doesn't take us long to add to that list, but you don't see other higher mammals seeking out fear the way we do. So what's wrong with us that we seek to induce these different levels of frontal lobe function? I hope you'll find enjoyment and catharsis amongst the skillfully crafted terrors that follow. Nothing I can say here can fully prepare you, but the very fact you're holding and reading this freaky collection probably says as much about you as the fantastic team of authors who've submitted their work. Short stories are an art form, and whilst there are many out there, it's rare to find a collection of such a high standard. So congratulations are in order to all whose work is showcased here. I'm envious of you as a reader, about to witness them for the first time. Or if you're rereading, then bonus points for your great taste in horror.
Hi there, Dan here. The bedrock of our anthologies are the people who enter the competitions that they're based on. We judge anonymously and fairly often find the people who have entered more than one story have landed on the long or short list with more than one. We've never had a rule that says a writer can only win one prize. Our main criterion is quality writing, and if someone enters with more than one great story, then we're very happy to take the lot. It's theoretically possible that one day a single writer will sweep up all the prizes and will end up publishing an anthology of their stories alone. I don't see it happening, there's too much quality and competition out there, but there are repeated names in this anthology. After the first few competitions, when we realised that writing groups were entering, we introduced a discounted rate to encourage more. And in Dread Cold, we have representation from two groups that we know about. There's no obligation on anyone to say. The Chapel on Le Frith Writers Group and the Banbury Writers Cafe. We now have a pastiche of Dread Cold authors talking about the book. Firstly, the Chapel and Le Frith writers. We already know one of them, the author Mark P. Henderson, who's been with us for several years as a novelist. In fact, when the anonymised list came back from the final judging and we matched stories with names for the first time, a big cheer went up when Mark had been awarded the first prize. Mark and two of his colleagues, Stephanie Billen and Caroline Hardwick from the Chapel on Le Frith group chat about their stories and where their ideas came from. The group as a whole carried off both first and second prizes, so congratulations to the group.
Hello, I'm Mark Henderson. I help to run the creative writing group in Chapel Frith, and here are two of my fellow members of the group, Steph Billen and Caroline Valance, previously Caroline Hardwick. All three of us had a shot at the short horror fiction competition that FBP ran a couple of years ago, and our three stories are in the anthology. Let me start, Steph, by asking you, what gave you the idea and how did you develop it?
Well, of course, we had this prompt with this competition of this wonderful picture of the Alpine castle, and it was trying to think, what did that make me think of? And it did make me think of the kind of scenes that you sometimes get on the wall at the dentist, or sometimes even on the ceiling at the dentist. So that was my first thought. And then I found the dentist scene quite an easy one to conjure up in my mind.
Right, okay. So you're in the dentist chair, looking, as we often do, either up the dentist's nose or at the ceiling.
Yes.
And there is this scene that we were given, this picture of the mountain range, this strange hotel come castle building beside the lake, and the chalets up the snowy slope. Well, looking at that picture kind of distracts you from what the dentist is doing, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I thought a dentist is a good setting for a horror story, because you're quite often terrified anyway, and I kind of ramped it up a bit by having my heroine being somebody who suffers with sort of chronic anxiety anyway, and that's kind of physical fear that comes with that type of anxiety with a capital A. So I had her in that state for starters, without any supernatural things that might be going on as well.
Right. So she was psychologically prepared for something, interesting to happen.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And then I'm not quite sure why I suddenly started talking about the Dream of Gerontius, but when I was at school, I sang in a choir, and we sang this choral work, The Dream of Gerontius, and I sang it. I didn't really notice what I was singing, and my mother went to see it, and I came out afterwards and said, well, what did you think? And she was completely ashen, and she just said, it's horrible, isn't it? It's awful. You know, you've listened to it, the words, what is this pain that is worse than death? And she was completely spooked by the whole thing. And I was sort of, oh, really? And so I sort of revisited that and had a look at some of the words. And I thought that actually could be quite a useful thing to have running through this woman's mind as she's sitting there expecting the worst.
Yes, John Newman's words are really quite creepy, aren't they? Yes. But Elgar's music is rather delightful, and some beautiful tunes in it. But then, lo and behold, what happens? That having her terror of the dentist and her thoughts of the Dream of Gerontius, what happens? She disappears into the scene.
Yeah, that's a bit of a spoiler, Mark, but yes.
But what's interesting about that is that I wrote of disappearing people as well.
Right. Yes. That's right.
It's interesting, isn't it? How we worked on these stories, of course, independently, and they're three very different stories.
Yes.
But we, just because of the way we interact in a group, I think we get a lot of stimulus from each other.
We do. I mean, I was definitely at a point where I had the setting and I had my heroine, but I wasn't really sure what next. And I knew what she was in for, an extraction, and I had a bit of a light bulb moment with thinking what that title could actually mean, because of the conversations that we had in the writing group and some suggestions and brainstorming amongst the group, which just shows how useful it is to work with other writers.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, as I've often said, writing is a solitary occupation, and the best thing writers can do is to interact with other writers. and I think it's paid off very well in this case. Yeah. Okay. Now, Caroline, you wrote something very different, and you know, where did this idea come from, and how did you develop it?
Well, I thought I was going to struggle because horror has never been my genre for writing. I'm a bit more of a sort of gritty realist and humour. And I had to sort of search back into my mind when I started as a teenager reading horror and science fiction and things like that.
Yeah.
And at school, the first horror as such that we were introduced to was Edgar Allan Poe short stories. And they always stuck in my mind. The way he wrote was just so... it really did make you were there with all the horror of it, but then he never explained anything. You know, it was all left to your imagination, which is even worse, obviously, than any real horror. So I sort of got into that idea, but then looking at the picture that we've been given, which was this beautiful fantasy snowscape and mountains, it evoked an awful lot of sort of holidays and but all very otherworldly. So I then decided to set it in more of a fantasy land, and then it seemed to come very easily. But the actual story is actually one that happens, horrific as it is, happens in modern day times as well. But you know, it's something you do read about and think, how could somebody possibly do that? You know, and why would somebody think that was their only way out of the situation? And it does always seem to be the male person in a relationship or mainly that tends to end up in this situation for some reason or other. And it translated very well into a sort of fantasy land where people were more isolated, and somebody who had basically the world, it was his oyster. He had this you know, this castle, and he was rich and he could do very much what he wanted, but then his emotions when he falls in love, and the person he falls in love with is their own person and won't conform to his ideas of what it was all going to be like. So he ends up in this situation where he's going to lose everything in his mind, his whole reason for being, and takes this extraordinary, well, he thinks the only way out is to do what he does, not wanting to spoil it, but it's an extreme reaction. And then it's what would you do, what would be an appropriate sentence for such a person? And as you say, Stephanie, it's what pain is worse than death.
Yes.
And that's basically the where it came to. But I found it very easy to write, which made me a bit nervous about how, because normally I really struggle with writing things, and it all came quite easily. And then I was really worried that it had come so easily, so it must be rubbish, which is why it's so nice to share it with a group of people who are so supportive. And you know, and then think, well, actually maybe it's not rubbish, and people do enjoy it. And that's what I find so nice about having such a disparate group of people that meet, that all have our own you know, specialities, but we all have a go at everything, at different things. And whilst doing that, you suddenly realise that you can adapt your form of writing to quite a few different genres and few different situations.
Yeah.
Yeah. And find it really enjoyable, which I did. Yes.
Yes, and it is interesting that, because as you say, I mean, it's just not your sort of thing. But one feature of your story was the consistency of the voice, and the way the style flowed so well. I can see that, you know, the sort of reading of horror and science fiction stories in our youth, which I suppose we all did, gave you some sort of lever to work with. But also your crime fiction writing, I think, came into play in a subtler way in designing that story. Yeah. But it did work rather nicely. Well, after all, you got the second prize in the competition, which was, I think, well merited. Okay. Well, as for me, I looked at the scene and I thought, what am I going to do? Because I'm not really a horror story writer either, but I do like writing. I do like stories that are slightly creepy, slightly sinister, with things unexplained. So I thought, well, here's an opportunity to write something like that. And so I bookended the story by having two men who are the focus of the story, one of whom smokes a cigar. And when they go into the building, what do they find but a long red hair on a chair in the library. And at the end of the book, we have the two women arriving, one who has long red hair, and she knows somebody who's been there recently because she can smell cigar smoke, which is one reason why I called the story The Loop. And accordingly, I invented the name La B.L.E for the mountain range. Okay. And as for the names of the two characters, well, yeah, okay, they're going to disappear. I guess that's not too much of a spoiler, because how it happens is perhaps the story. But I invented the names Franklin and Irvin for them. Either of those names, both those names could serve as forename or surname. And well, Irvin, as in Mallory and Irvin, who made the failed Everest attempt in the 1920s. And Mallory's body was found, but Irvin's never was. So there's a mountaineer who disappeared. And Franklin, as in the Franklin who led the search for the Northwest Passage in the 19th century, and his expedition, well, they trapped in the ice, and that all disappeared as well. So there's a Franklin and Irvin who historically disappeared. So I just nicked the names. But the hotel, castle, whatever it is, somehow looks after them. Food appears, very good food. You never see anybody delivering it or cooking it or anything like that. It just appears. And then all their goods are brought up to their bedrooms, and the bedrooms are laid out for them, especially equipped for each of them. So the hotel somehow manages to look after them terribly well. But then they just cease to be there. And such is the story. And yes, I mean, I suppose I took a leaf out of Edgar Allan Poe's book in that I didn't want to explain anything. It's just a total mystery.
Yeah, and you don't want to, I think you want to give the reader a chance to have a few interpretations themselves and
yes.
leave a few loose ends, don't you, I think?
Of course you do. But we've all done that, I think. You know,
I think so. I mean, I had my dentist looking at the X-ray and seeing something.
Yes.
Who knows what?
Who knows what, indeed. That was just, that was lovely.
And I like what you said about the names, because I played around a little bit with names as well. The doctor's called Mr. Abaddon, and that is Hebrew for an underworld of lost souls or something.
Yeah.
And the jackdaw on the windowsill, that's a portent of bad luck, you know. So it's quite fun to pop in a few things like that.
Yes. Well, we all love doing things like that, don't we? And it doesn't matter if the reader doesn't pick them up, doesn't pick up their solution.
No, those are just
It's just
extra little.
Yes.
For when people write the PhD on our stories, then that's for them, really, isn't it?
Yes. Well, they'd better notice it. We've got to get doctorates.
That's right. Yes.
Well, it's lovely to see you both again. I've not seen either of you for some little time, although we will be getting together to prepare for the Buxton Festival Fringe in the near future, to which I look forward. And really look forward to seeing both again. And I say congratulations to both of you on having stories in the anthology Dread Cold. And thanks for chatting. Okay.
The Banbury Writers Cafe are new to us, but we loved their stories. One of them took third prize and 2 others were also prize winners. For this launch, we asked the Banbury Writers Cafe to introduce themselves as a writers group.
Hello! My name's Max. I'm part of the Banbury Writers Cafe. I've got an entry in the Dread Cold anthology. I like writing fantasy, and the chance to do a fantasy horror crossover, I couldn't resist. It's quite dark, it's not what I normally write, so it was a bit of a challenge, but I really enjoyed it.
I'm Valerie. I've been coming to the Banbury Writers Cafe since before it was actually called the Banbury Writers Cafe. And I find it inspires me to write things that I wouldn't otherwise have written. In fact, one night, the project that we were given included ghost story. I'd never written a ghost story before, but I thought it was a good opportunity. And on my drive home, I was so inspired that I'd actually worked out the whole story in my head. And as soon as I got home, I scribbled it down and I was really quite pleased with it. It was actually a Shakespearean ghost.
Hi, I'm Mike. I'm currently a member of the Banbury Cafe Writing Club, a club that I enjoy coming to. It's helped me develop my writing style. I'm currently working on a novelette about a futuristic Roman Empire, and doing readings at the club has helped give me good positive feedback and criticism, which has helped immensely with the writing. I've also done a lot of short stories through the club, which again has helped develop style and focus on writing short, sharp, punchy narrative. So all in all, I think it's a great place to come to learn.
Hi, I'm Chloe. I'm a member of the Banbury Writers Group. I've been here since 2017, and since being a member of the Writers Club, I've been able to publish several books and be featured in quite a few anthologies. I think my latest work, which was published last year, is a novel called Game of Mass Destruction. It's a dystopian sci-fi. I do write quite a lot of things, but dystopian and poetry and horror are the ones I've found that I've enjoyed the most. And since publishing it, it's been translated into Portuguese, Spanish, and there's an Italian and Chinese translation in the works. And I think without the club, if it hadn't have been for the club, I wouldn't have had the guts to try it. So I'm very grateful for the club.
Hi, my name's Devon Rosenblatt. I originally came to the Writers Group to help improve my script writing because I'm from a media production background. However, after writing some short stories, I got inspired and actually ended up writing a novel, which I hope to release soon. I'm also the person that's doing the editing for this video for the Dread Cold anthology. And I hope just seeing all the talking heads today that it goes to show that it doesn't matter your background, because as you can see, the writers that have spoken today have got varied tastes and very diverse. So yeah, it goes to show that it doesn't matter what your background is, that such groups can inspire you and to go out and do things that you never thought you'd do before.
Hello, I'm Jackie and I've been a member of Banbury Writers Cafe for quite a few years now, and I've found it a really, really supportive place to come with new stories, old stories, ideas. You just chuck it out there and you get the most amazing feedback. I've entered a lot of competitions through the stuff I've written here with support from the members, And I would absolutely recommend any writer join a writers group. And if there isn't one near them, then make one. It's just such a really, really positive place to be when you're a writer.
I get out of bed every morning, about 8, don't have any breakfast, get in my chair, start tapping on the keyboard. About 10, I have breakfast. And that goes on to about 12. And then about 1, oh, it's time to have a bath, so. And that's it. That's my day, really. So coming here once a fortnight makes a change. You know, it's a place where I can come and waffle a bit. Because otherwise, really, I just live on my own and I never see anybody and nobody ever talks to me. And, you know, it gets just a smidgen boring. So, yes, I suppose I do get something out of coming here. Although, of course, they do nick £3 out of my pocket every time. And, well, I'm one of these old codgers, you see, and £3 really, really does hurt when it's extracted. But, well, what can you say? That's life.
I've been a member of the club since it started at another location, and I joined it because, having retired from journalism after nearly 60 years, I miss writing. I didn't know what I wanted to write about, but I found it as soon as I met some of the other members. I like writing about people because I think people are the most interesting thing in the world. I do prefer stories with happy endings. So you won't find me putting pen to paper with flying objects coming at you, or be they living or metallic. Yes, give me a happy ending any day of the week.
Hi, I'm Jackie. I write under JC Bateman. I have got a story in Dread Cold called I Will Always Find You. I do like to write crime. I like a dead body in my stories. I joined the Banbury Writers Cafe to help improve my writing, to fine-tune my writing skills, get everybody else's opinions and critiques, and it has helped immensely. I enjoy writing just for the fun of it, for other people to read, and to enter into competitions.
Moving away from writers' groups, we're also featuring a writer, Alan Payne, who has now appeared in 4 of our anthologies. He's got 2 stories in this one alone, one of which was a prize winner. Well done, Alan. He and Mark Henderson chat about their writing here. Enjoy.
Well, hello, I'm Mark Henderson. Alan Payne and I, who have both contributed to the anthology Dread Cold in response to FBB's short horror fiction competition a few years ago, here to talk to each other this morning about our stories and about, I suppose, about horror writing in general. Yeah. Is it a fair question, Alan, what got you into writing horror stories? Or was it just a response to that competition?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's, you know, I'll take my hand at whatever the competition asks for, I suppose. And my second story, I mean, I wrote, I've got 2 stories, Pandora's Diamond and Open Prison.
Yeah.
And the first story, I wrote it specifically trying to follow the outline of a competition. It's got to be a horror story, it's got to have this and this and this. So I worked on that for quite a long time, I think. Yeah, but even before I wrote anything down, I sort of mulled it over and kicked it around, and it eventually wrote it, you know, as horrifically as I could.
Right. Yes.
And bringing in some historical elements as well, because some of the action described is actually genuinely historical about a rather horrific execution that took place. So
right. Yes. Okay.
But then I had a thought. Well, it'd be nice if I could write something else. You know, so I submitted that story. Let's see if I can write something else, taking a completely different tack. And I wrote Open Prison very, very quickly. You know, much more quickly than the first story. And then I thought about, well, it's not really a horror story. It's a kind of more dystopian science fiction, because it is a bit sort of horrific in a way that someone's trapped and can't get out of his situation. But it's not really a kind of classic horror story. And I very nearly didn't submit it. I thought, oh, it's not really quite within the bounds of a competition. But but I submitted it anyway, and it did quite well in the competition. Got fourth place, so I was quite pleased with that. And
they are two contrasting stories. I agree. I enjoyed them both, but they're very different. Open Prison is much more straightforward.
Yeah, I think that's probably why. Maybe that's why I did better. It's a little you know, Pandora's maybe a little more convoluted. Well, it's a good story. I mean, I like it's a good story. It's got all sorts of elements in it, some surprises.
Yes.
And
a very thought-provoking ending, which I personally liked very much. But I think the contrast between your two stories, Alan, is it's a microcosm of the whole anthology, what I've seen of it, because the variety of responses to the FBP's challenge was quite remarkable.
Oh yes, I mean I've been reading through a draft of the book as well, and you know, the different aspects brought to it. I mean, there's there's different realms. There's a story set on an alien planet. There's a climate change disaster. There's all sorts of things going on, and some people, I mean, particularly Kester Robert Park has submitted 5 stories, all with very different, very different things coming out of them, and.
One or two are very much in the Edgar Allan Poe tradition, and one or two are not. So, yeah, it's the variety is great, and I think that's going to be brilliant for readers. You know, you get such contrast between one story and the next.
Yeah, it's hard to say how these things sort of, how you sort of, whether you can even say how the thought process came about for actually thinking of a story in the first place.
Well, the tiniest trivial things can set off a story. Yeah, I mean, we can all give examples of that. You know, a dropped fork, or a whispered conversation somewhere suddenly gives you a story.
Well, I can't even quite piece together now how, I mean, part of the genesis of my story was that I thought one of the mountains looked a bit like a rough cut diamond, a very, very large rough cut diamond. So you look in a picture and there's a kind of what looks like a sort of 4-sided pyramid, which is the basic shape of a diamond crystal. So that's really, you know, gave me the way in. But how I got all the rest of it, it's hard to say.
You know, really, it's like interrogating your dreams, isn't it? You know, you know, I think psychoanalysis is slightly less reliable than palmistry, but you know, I really don't believe much in dream interpretation. But it's very much the same sort of thing. How do you come by the final form of a story? What are the thought processes? We can never really trace them.
Yeah, I remember when they first at Fantasticon, when they first put up this picture to announce the competition. This was several years ago now, because we had a Fantasticon for a couple of years, and I was looking at the picture, and Dan Grubb, the CEO of Fantastic Books, came up behind me. I said to him, you know, I can't think of anything about this picture yet, and he said, not yet.
Exactly. Yes. Well, he's been in the business a good long time, and he knows how authors work. Yes.
It did take quite a while to think of something. I mean, I had to contemplate, have it going through my head for quite a while before anything really kind of came together.
Me too. In fact, in my case, Alan, I wasn't you know, I saw the competition and I thought, oh, why don't I get my students to do this? It's high time they wrote for competitions.
Mm-hmm.
So I took it to the group, and 4 of them decided they would have a go.
All right.
And they wrote 4 very different stories. Big surprise. The only way I persuaded them to do it was, look, if you'll have a go, I'll have a go as well.
Yeah.
Right? That was it. And actually, of the of those 4, 2 of them have got into the anthology, which I thought
All right. That's very good.
I was delighted. I was absolutely delighted for them. And it's well, they get published for the first time in their lives.
Mm.
And well, what that does to us is always positive, isn't it?
Oh yes, I mean, I was, this is the 4th anthology I've been included in now, and it was amazing to when he did the first one, which was Dreaming of Steam, to get the email to say, well, I've been shortlisted, and please come to a presentation where we'll.
Great, yes.
Yeah, and it was quite an event as well. We went down to the Wolds Railway where they're built a short section of track, and they're trying to rebuild part of the old line from Driffield to Malton, which was what the story was about. So that was a great thrill to see. And then there's my story in a book.
Yes, it's a very good feeling.
Mm.
I never forget that many years ago getting my first short story published in a magazine. God, I think I've become a writer.
Yes, it is. And then to have subsequent stories published in all the subsequent anthologies. I mean, it's been very good indeed.
Great journey, hasn't it? If I may, a couple of questions. I was interested in your names. You're the protagonist, narrator of Pandora's Diamond. It's called, how do you pronounce it? Samala?
Somalia, yes.
It's a town in Somalia.
Oh, right. No, it didn't really. I mean, I was just putting. It didn't really have any significance. I wanted to have a name that sounded sort of a little bit interesting. Not just a straight, but like it could be a name. It could be a person's name. So it was it was a name that sort of, well, it's not quite. Not quite a normal name, but it's not completely fantastical either.
No, I mean, it didn't strike me as anything wrong with it by any means.
No.
Name, but I just wondered if there was any significance in naming it up.
Not really. It was really going for the sound, the sound of it. Something would sound a little bit exotic, but not really. Didn't want to be called, just by an absolutely everyday name, that she wasn't called Kate or Sandra or anything.
That's right. I mean, there's something slightly exotic about the name.
Yeah. So the whole thing is exotic. She's there in this rather nice room. She's looking out on the ice and snow, and
yeah, I know, and it all feels very relaxed at that point.
Yeah. Oh yes. Yes.
And something's coming. The other Germano is Germano. That's not an uncommon. Well, I wouldn't say it's a common name, but one hears several people called Germano.
Yeah.
In literature, it actually means Germanophile.
Yeah.
But again, I take it.
No, I wasn't really looking. I wasn't really looking for but something that sound. It sounds a bit sort of Bela Lugosi and
yeah. It has that sort of connotation, doesn't it?
Yeah. He wasn't called. Again, he's not called John Smith, and no disrespect to anybody called John Smith,
but I know what you mean. It's something a little bit different.
Yeah, he's a little bit kind of, well, he's a little bit sort of it's almost a sort of horror film kind of, almost a stereotypical character you might expect it to have in a horror film. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And you realize quickly that there's something's got a twist on him. The ending of that story is lovely because we've already seen history being compacted, and then space is compacted at the end. how far has she actually travelled before she beats the figure and the horses again?
Well, yes, and it's no, I mean, there's no real explanation. It's just sort of.
That's what I liked.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, I can't try to explain how that happened, but he's had.
No, it shouldn't be explained. It really shouldn't. That's what's so delightful about it. Really attractive story. Open prison. I mean, you know, the name Ames coming from the French Ami, it's a friend, and Dyson from Dionysus. It was a friend of a drinker, I suppose. I'm just interested in the provenances of the names, but as you know, you've already made clear, the names just come, and you don't want them to sound too ordinary, but you want them to sound credible, and you want them to sound right in context, which they did. Granton is interesting, of course, because it's a district of northern Edinburgh.
Yeah, again, I didn't know that, but
it's yes.
But somehow I felt it was sort of it was right to sort of give him a single name.
Yes, I agree. I agree. It was right to give him a single name, because you know, well, the context in which what will happen to him happens.
Yeah.
You don't expect full names, do you?
No, but the family he's working for is Ames Dyson. It's double barreled. It's got, well, I mean, there's the it has a connotation of being very wealthy, like the vacuum cleaner man.
Yes. Well, oh yes, no, I was thinking just the connection with Dionysus, but I haven't.
No, I was thinking more that the vacuum cleaner man.
Yes. Should have spotted that, shouldn't I?
Yeah, I was not trying to link it, but it's a name that sort of I felt was associated with being rich and powerful.
Wealth and aristocrat, wealth and an aristocracy, as suggested by the hyphenated name. Yes, so the wealthy upper class, and it really does create the relationship with Granton. It's a straightforward story, and it works. You know, it has a clear direction. It just goes from start to finish, and it ends very satisfactorily. The reader's
it was all worked on, and it's all very streamlined because it was done very quickly.
Yes, it did, and sometimes that really works, doesn't it?
Yeah, it did, and so the other story was kicked around. I did this and I did that, and I think the end result is very good, but it was a long road to get there.
Yes.
And the other story of Open Prison was just kind of straightforward. There's an idea. Tap. Right. I had really the whole a first draft in a couple of hours or something.
It's very satisfying when that happens, and it's not very common. But with straightforward stories, yeah, why not? As for mine, I mean, the title, I think, suggests what's happening. I called it The Loop. I chose names deliberately. Franklin and Mallory could be forenames or could be surnames. Franklin, there was a Franklin who led a search for the Northwest Passage. And
yes, that didn't go well, did it?
No, they disappeared. And Mallory and Irvin, climbed Everest and disappeared. And Mallory was found and Irvin's wasn't. So, those are people who sort of disappeared on mountains or in the Arctic waste.
Oh yes, that's true, and sort of I hadn't realised those connections, but no, it's but yeah, Franklin certainly, and Mallory and Irving, they found Mallory. They found it because he had his name in his jacket. That's how they identified the remains.
Yes. Yes, fascinating, isn't it?
But it's an interesting. So it's set in modern times, and then they kind of enter this sort of not ancient, but almost medieval, somehow almost medieval world as they're coming into the castle, and it's
That's right, and it's almost a feeling of stepping back in time and then coming forward again.
Yeah, it's so they're going in, and some unexpected things are happening, and they don't quite understand it, but they're being drawn along by the
Yes.
process.
Yes, and they're being looked after, but in a very sinister way, which is
yeah,
it's quite fun to write.
No, I'm sure it was. Yeah,
yes. And that did take a few drafts, I have to say. And I wasn't satisfied with the version I sent to the competition, and I actually revised it again after that with FPP's blessing.
Yeah.
Oh, there we are.
But so what we got you? So it's just I mean, there's almost. I mean, in it's practically the same story, but we had very little editing has been done on them in the versions we've got now.
No, I mean, I think the authors have generally done a pretty good job, which saves the FPP's editors a lot of work.
Well, yes, I mean, I think it's getting. The first story I submitted had quite a lot of suggestions, and I think I'm maybe now focusing in on what they expect, and I've had less modifications as time has gone on.
Yes, I think we all, I suppose we all improve a little, don't we? As my old English teacher at school many years ago said, practice makes less imperfect.
Yeah, well, I found it's been very good to I was a bit surprised when I first entered these competitions to find that you had a professional editor looking at it and saying, well, that's not quite right. Why didn't you do this? Why a bit sort of taken aback at first, but I've realised now that's a very valuable process.
Oh, very. And well, I mean, I've told I've told Dan and his colleagues this. I have in my time had work with 5 different publishing houses, and FBP's editing process is the best I've come across among 5, which is, I'm very happy to say that, and I'm happy to be on record saying it. And I wish other publishing houses had editors of similar quality. However, let's not go on about that too much. Alan, it's been a good chat. I liked this.
It's been very interesting. So interesting reading through the stories, and very nice talking to you as well. And it's
very nice to talk to you, Alan. Thank you very much for chatting.
Thank you very much indeed.
Dread Cold, a horror anthology from Fantastic Books Publishing. Book review by Mark P. Henderson. Matt Adcock's story, The Power of Darkness to Reach Out and Touch Us, provides a fitting climax to this collection of 25 short horror fiction stories, Dread Cold. Adcock's theme, the catastrophic effect of sustained total darkness on the human mind, was explored in hair-raising detail in his scary novel Complete Darkness, which won critical accolades after its publication in 2019. The opening sentence of his new story points the direction. Humans are creatures that take natural light for granted. But Adcock doesn't plagiarise even from himself. He's given us another original, deeply unsettling tale, one that explores not only the impact of darkness but also the depths of human cruelty. It made me shudder. Dread Cold is the product of the most recent writing competition from Fantastic Books Publishing. The prompt was a picture of a winter landscape with a large building in the middle distance and snow-clad mountains in the background, with the invitation, write a short horror fiction story no more than 2,000 words. In view of the success of his novel, Matt Adcock was invited to judge the competition. He accepted the invitation, selected what he deemed to be the 25 best stories submitted in response to the prompt, and added a foreword. Then he added a story of his own, to show everyone else how to do it, one might say. Several of the stories in the anthology are well written and effective, but Adcock's own contribution really sticks in the mind. Fantastic Books Publishing donates a significant part of its proceeds from publications to charities. The agreed percentage of its income from Dreadcold will go to Anti-Slavery International and Embrace the Middle East. Therefore, if you follow my recommendation and buy this book, you'll not only have Matt Adcock's terrifying story, along with others, to look forward to, you'll also be contributing to excellent causes.
Fantastic books, yes, completely innovative, and I'll tell you what I like about them. Well, I like a lot of things about them, but one thing I particularly like is they regularly produce anthologies of short stories, collections of short stories, and what these do is they give the profits from these anthologies to a named charity. So each time they plan an anthology, they name the charity that they are going to sort of put this anthology out for, and then they put out the call for stories. And they will often give first-time writers or very new writers space because it's done purely on quality. They like the stories, they will publish it, and they will invite maybe a couple of better known authors just to make the anthology a little bit more marketable. And I have published stories in 2 of the Fantastic Books anthologies. One was just let me remember. Yeah, Fusion. This was a fantasy and sci-fi anthology where I did a story called The Trouble with Dragons. And the background to this story was every time I walk past building sites and you see all those different JCBs and building machines, they look like strange dinosaur-like creatures to me, or maybe dragons or something like that. You know, the long arm of the digger looks like a neck, and those jaws on the things, they're quite terrifying. And I thought about a little girl who goes past a building site every day, and she's looking at these diggers, and she thinks they're dragons, and she thinks that dragons have come into the area. Now, tied in with this is a story of a school friend of hers who is being abused by his parent, and the dangers that the 2 children face. This is not a children's story, even though it's about children. And how, without giving anything away, the dragons intervene to save them. So I suppose the question is, are we seeing JCBs or are we seeing dragons? Who knows? The story doesn't tell you, but it poses the question. The second anthology I submitted for, I actually wrote the title story for, The Dummy's Guide to Serial Killing, which was a crime anthology. And that I was particularly happy about because Fantastic Books submitted the anthology to the Crime Writers Association Dagger Awards, and we carried off the Short Story Award that year for the best short story published, which was absolutely great. I was delighted by that. Other anthologies, oh yeah, they cover a whole range. They've done poetry, children's stories, horror stories. That's right in my field. They've done more sci-fi and fantasy because I think that Fantastic Books is known for its sci-fi and fantasy collection. I mean, they do the elite stories, for example. It is one of their big things. And they're moving into their gaming field, which also touches upon the fantasy and sci-fi side of things. Would I publish with small publishers again? Oh, absolutely. I think that for writers in this day and age, publishing is a jungle. And you can be with a big publisher, and if you can't keep your sales going up and up and up as you put out your book a year, I'm talking about genre fiction here, of course, this is where they want a book a year, then they will just chuck you out. They have no sense of loyalty towards authors. A small publisher will cherish their authors and look after them. you feel a lot more valued with a small publisher. So I would absolutely go with a small publisher again, anytime.
Penny ponders on dread cold. Here comes the fear. Dread cold, terrifying tales to chill the blood. Dread cold will do what it says on the tin. Its guest editor is author Matt Adcock. As well as editing the collection, Adcock has also contributed to the anthology. He has an impressive track record. His debut novel sat alongside Philip Pullman and Margaret Atwood in Den of Geek's top books. Dread Cold is a horror anthology, in case you haven't guessed that from the title, the cover and the tagline. This raised two questions for me that I explored with both publisher and editor. The book itself showcases horror across the spectrum. The starting point for all the stories was the image that is now on the cover. It was amazing to see the range that came out of that. Is it a castle on a hill or a hotel in a ski resort? Does the action happen now or far into the future? Are we taken to the edges of the lake or deep inside that building? Are we even on planet Earth as the action rolls? But winding back a little, I started to wonder about how this particular award-winning author came to be the guest editor at all. Now, don't misinterpret my curiosity on this point. Matt Adcock has done an excellent job and it's a great book, but on the face of it, he's not an obvious match. Let me explain. Matt Adcock has rightly won awards for his science fiction, and it's science fiction he's best known for. So why would he agree to edit a horror anthology? But wait a minute. Rolling back a little further, why did the publisher ask a science fiction author in the first place? Well, here's what I learned from the publisher. He said, all our anthologies support named charities, and for this one we decided to support organisations fighting slavery. It's true we mostly focus on science fiction and fantasy, but we had success with a horror anthology in 2015, and I felt it was time for another. When I was looking for a guest judge, I learnt that Matt was active in the anti-slavery movement, and so he was the obvious first choice. He not only judged the shortlist and helped to edit the stories, he also contributed a chilling tale of his own. And as to why Matt said yes, here's what Matt himself had to say. I already liked Fantastic Books' ethos. Their anthologies all contribute to different charities. So when they approached me and said that this one was supporting anti-slavery organisations, I wanted to be a part of it. Well, that didn't immediately address the mismatched genre part of the question, but Matt went on to say, horror fascinates me. Did you know that humans are the only species shown to purposefully scare themselves? Why do we do it? Why do we enjoy it? Those are good questions. I don't have any answers. But I can shed some light on that 2015 horror anthology that was referred to. It was called 666 and comprised stories of exactly 666 words. The Dread Cold, Stories and Authors. The Loop by Mark P. Henderson. The Extraction by Stephanie Billen. Terror at the Bay Palace by Peter Ford. Utopia Mine by Kester Robert Park. The Salvation of Cassandra by Stephen Patchett. What It Said on the Tin by Peter Ford. Open Prison by Alan R. Payne. The Giants by Kester Robert Park. The Hero's Kiss by Bill Davidson. Sunday Lamb by Kester Robert Park. I Will Always Find You by J.C. Bateman. Frost from the Flames by Max Bantelman. Moon and I by Kester Robert Park. Pandora's Diamond by Alan R. Payne. A Study in White by Caroline Hardwick. Incarceration by Valerie Moises. Return of the Hunter by Kester Robert Park. A Tilt Toward Darkness by Jackie Gooding. Games Up by Lorraine Childerston. The Devil's Shelter by Joe Dolcini. Loss of Life by John Tolmie. Escaping the Cold by David Stewart. The Crowd at the Gate by Tansy Hawksley. Collapse by Jeremy Childerston. And The Power of Darkness to Reach Out and Touch Us by Matt Adcock.
This is a reading from the Dread Cold horror anthology. The story is called Moon and I by Kester Robert Park. Read by Dan. It was an accident. Your kind and mine were never meant to mingle. In my case, it was serendipitous up to a point. In yours, not so much. You see, I am dungeon-kin, born into the darkness, not the elegant twilight of a gas-lit garden. I mean the terrifying, blind darkness of hearing a hissing creature before you and backing into the ample jaws of the one waiting behind. That darkness. We were not born to rule as you, with your moist flesh and juicy brains. We were made to make fear the way your artists evoke beauty on the canvas, to wage war the way your young people make love in the soft light of morning. Where is democracy for us? We who are evil. There is none, only torture, mayhem and cruelty. So, how did it come to pass, this horrible eventuality? Well, perhaps another millennium might have passed before I saw her, the queen of the night sky that you call Moon. You see, although this castle is shared, we demons possess by far the greater part of it. Our unmappable jumble of catacombs, stairways, pits and cages descends deeply into the shadowed earth, until the soil begins to be warmed by the roasting intestines of the planet, and the womb of this infanticidal mother is 1,000 savage murders from the surface. It is the court of the Nether Throne, where a tyrant monster exerts its power over the lawless violence of the Nether. Just as I have found, here on the surface, the closer you are to power, the more you soak it up. And you can believe me when I say I was close. Oh, I could smell it. It dissolved in my olfactory mucus and tingled in my tentacled cerebrum. I was close enough, anyway, that Ubula, the ruler of the Nether, had me exiled into what I used to think of as the depths. Now I know she sent me to the surface, where it is cold at night, and there are rooms rather than voids, and prisoners to play with. Oh, how they screamed! Delicious music! One day I passed through a room. You carve the stones so exactly, your cold prisons are so worthy of despair. I saw a curious tunnel, too narrow for all but the most minuscule of dungeon dwellers. I, being the curious variety of monster, peered into it. It was a chimney, designed to let the most minuscule moiety of light drift down onto the grains of dirt on that cell floor, so that one of your abandoned might not forget the surface that they would never see again. There, in that hopeless hole, I looked up into the night and immediately fell in love. Oh, her phantasmal glow was the very eminence of beauty, her shadows like a continent, no, like a deadly claw. She reached into me and plucked out my essence, like a starling snatching a cherry from its branch. Not even the most evil dungeon dweller had ever imperilled my soul, but your Moon. She swallowed it in an instant. Every day before that moment I had lived for my own selfish purposes, but from that moment I had a new mission. I would serve Moon. I would do whatever she asked. Come to the surface, she seemed to say, and so it was ordained. Although I was fearful of falling out of the bottom of the world, I dragged my sordid mass to the very limits of the underworld, and pushed. The door at the bottom of the deepest sub-basement of my world opened into the deepest sub-basement of yours. I felt reality twist dizzyingly as I stumbled from one to the other, the nadir behind my claws resolving itself with sickening clarity as the unreachable heights of the world. It was an apostasy. Nevermore would the nether throne be the heart of the world. Never again would the thought of dragging my oozing carcass onto that stone chair agonise me. Long I had desired the crown. Now I had a new dream. "Where are you?" I thought she asked. "I can't see you." My heart hurt to hear her disconsolate voice, and so I continued, now in the direction of what more fashionable beings than I had always thought of as down. I passed through chambers, along halls, slithered upstairs, and winched myself up ladders. Every soft-skinned human I saw immediately opened their mouth and sang to me, their darling voices soaring to discordant heights. Some fainted, which made them much easier to eat. Some awoke while I was eating them, and sang again until my 7 rows of teeth finally punctured their lungs. Your people are beautiful, and so succulent. But I was not here for them. My only purpose was to behold the lustrous surface of her celestial body. I continued to rise. At last the mossy brickwork turned to tapestried walls, and the damp became fresh and dry. Now the humans I encountered were encased in metal and carried blades, attempting to slice off pieces of my body. How meanly they served themselves. They took such tiny fragments of me. What pointless rationing, when they could have me entire. When I lurched towards them, my playmates scattered. I had to chase them down and force myself upon them. "Come out, my love. Quit your hiding place. Cast aside your concealment. I cannot wait," she gasped in the special voice I'd made for her. Her importunity shook me back to the true nature of my mission, to get outside and see her. I cast about and crashed through thin wooden doors that could not hold me, until at last I saw, through a tiny cleft in the wall, the viscid darkness and her tiny smouldering cleric splashed across the sky. This was the right way. I pressed myself against one more enormous door, by acidic discharge leaving a me-shaped hole in the thick timber. Thus I plopped humiliatingly into an enormous trough of stagnant liquid that seemed to surround the castle. For a moment I was submerged, and I lost my sense of up, either old or new. Then, from where I languished in the water, I saw aqueous fractals coursing around like a dust-crazed flock of birds, or the broken memory of a day, or a galactic puzzle trying to solve itself. It was her. She was trying to reach me through the waters. I rocketed up through the moisture and exploded into the dry night air. The cold penetrated my layers of epithelium so rapidly I laughed. My love had not exhausted her supply of surprises, and this made me so gloriously happy. I landed, and the impact drove the air from a million soggy pores, forming a long, rasping sound. The chill continued to sink into my flesh, causing me to contract and harden, but it did not matter. I was gazing up at her. "There you are, my love. You came for me. You are so bold, but still so far away. Can't you come any closer?" In desperation, I searched for an answer. It came. Beyond the castle's golden walls and the snow-glazed pines, I saw the angular peak of the first mountain I had ever seen. That there could be so much space on this side of the great divide, that I could occupy a stone body of such magnitude, enthralled me. Despite the freezing conditions that already turned half of me to ice, I flipped and rolled and pushed myself through the trees, over powder snow. I lurched and juddered and crashed and slid. This was not the cracked and crannied nether. I suffered horribly on my way up that mountain. Each step was propelled by her own voice, calling softly to me to keep coming. Sometimes a great body of wispy gases would drift between us. but I understood that she was still there and continued my agonising ascent. Hours passed, and then came her second great challenge to me. The blackness towering overhead, that vast pinpricked painting began to fade to blue, and she was fading with it. No, no! I would have torn the heads off every living creature and presented them to her, embroidered into one as the world's most grotesque trophy, if only she could have stayed with me. She did not stay with me. Singing and whispering and dreaming in the sky, she slipped away, one candela after another, like a red-hot brand turning into a silver scar on the lightening skin over my head. She had died, and I died too. In due course, a burning disc emerged, and my own weak flesh, unaccustomed to such radiation, began to singe like that of a captive lowered into a brazier. I didn't care. The faster I burned to ash, the better. I was the saddest that any monster had ever been, and not even held by the adrenaline-pumping threat of excruciating death that I had been my every waking moment until this new, exponentially worse nightmare had somehow unfolded from within it. I could not go back, and I didn't possess tear ducts, so I couldn't even cry. Won't you shed a tear for me in my place? Then, despite the fact that nothing good could ever occur again, it happened that the blue of the sky was stretched thin and pale. Perhaps it would be stretched as tight as catgut and made to string a violin. Perhaps your small, pathetic reality here in the blue bottom of the world would end with a musical lament that would quiver across reality and break the hearts of all the men and women in the world. I would not care. As I, too, faded into blue, only my own suffering would matter. But look! The blue sky. It faded still. The night was returning. And would it be a terrible, empty vacuum, a speckled satire of my former joy, or would the most wondrous entity breathe herself back into life again? It happened that she did, though I deserve not even one of those odd, pale striations across her blessed sphere. But it occurred to me that I could not lose her again. I could not live in that lonely world again. Fly to me. Forget this floating rock, she said. Come, be forever in my glow. But I could not. The hated world of my origin would not let me go, but neither could I ever let others have her. And then I realised. You scum! You with your soft encephalons wrinkled like Mandelbrot's and pretty expressive faces. I didn't know how, but I knew you would find a way. Get in a metal shell and fire yourselves into the sky, a sword of fire propelling you to heaven. I could not let that happen. And so, slowly I reached inside myself and pulled out the greasy, black sack that resided within me, and with a pair of hooks I ripped it open and released all of my hate into the world. And then I died, or rather dissipated, drifted onto the breeze, to land later on the lips and in the eyes of mortals, to crawl into their ears and percolate into their blood. My old, wrecked body deflated and began to liquefy, but I did not care, because now I lived darkly in the hearts of Homo sapiens, and now you would spend every waking moment dodging the dagger streaking towards your spine. As I said, it was a fateful meeting between your kind and mine, unintended by any soul or spirit, but what I did, I had to do. For if she cannot be mine, my jaundiced heart cannot abide that she belonged to any other. About the author. Kester Robert Park is from Argyll, Scotland. He's since lived in Glasgow, rural Yorkshire, York and Riobamba, Ecuador. He possesses a first-class honours degree in creative writing from the University of Hull and lives in Quito, Ecuador, with his wife and daughter. You can read his short stories The Perfect Family in the anthology 666 and Tatrabella in the anthology The Dummy's Guide to Serial Killing, both published by Fantastic Books. He currently works as an educational copy editor and ESL teacher. You can follow and be followed by Kester at twitter.com/tinklebadger, TINKLEBADGER, and read stories, essays and poems in English and Spanish at tenderlemonstration.wordpress.com. He is currently writing his debut novel. He is proud to present 5 stories in this collection, of which Moon and I is the 4th. The Moon and I was awarded 10th prize in the competition.